Welcome to the Psychedelic Spotlight podcast. I am your host, David Flores, CEO of Global Track Solutions. Now, as many of us who are involved in the cannabis industry and we're part of that industry's development and evolution over the last several years can probably attest to, is trying to navigate the legal and regulatory waters was complicated and challenging to say the least, especially for companies operating within that space. And as the psychedelic industry continues to evolve and develop on its own, there's reason to believe that many of the companies operating within this space will experience some similar challenges. So I'm very pleased on that topic then to have with me here today one of the preeminent legal experts within the psychedelic space. He is Dustin Robinson. He is the co-founder of Mr. Psychedelic Law, a Florida-based nonprofit organization. Dustin, it is a tremendous pleasure to have you here with me today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be on.
Yeah, we're very excited to have you on here. I know we got some really great topics to cover here, so looking forward to jumping right into it. And I guess on that, maybe the best place to start is if you could give us an overview of your background, your experience, and what ultimately led you to getting involved here in the medicinal psychedelic space.
Yeah, well, it's been a long journey, but yeah, my background is I'm an attorney. I'm also a licensed CPA and a licensed realtor. Got into the cannabis space. I had a friend that had a cannabis license. He was looking to do a transaction in the cannabis space. I really knew nothing about cannabis at the time. I had worked at a big law firm, Holland and Knight, previous to that, so had plenty of experience with the substantive area of law of M&A, which was really the type of transaction they were doing, but didn't know much about cannabis. But I was at a point in my life where I kind of just sold my interest in a company I had started. So I was kind of looking for my next thing. And so I decided to jump into that. I helped them put together that transaction. It involved two separate states. So had to learn the cannabis laws within both of those states and kind of apply it to the transaction we were doing. We successfully completed that transaction. He referred me to another cannabis client to help with a real estate transaction. And before I knew it, was just getting referrals in the space. So I started my law firm. At the time, it was really exclusively focused on cannabis. And about 20 months ago, a lot of my cannabis clients started coming to me interested in getting involved in psychedelics. And quite honestly, I didn't know much about psychedelics at the time. I thought it was already a little bit of a stretch that I was so deeply ingrained within the cannabis space. But the first client, they wanted to set up a grow out in Jamaica for research purposes. Another client wanted to do a retreat out in Brazil. But I really didn't start getting like super interested into it until the doctors that I work with started reaching out to me. I represent a large amount of the doctors here in Florida that do cannabis medicine. Florida is a strictly cannabis medical state right now for marijuana. So represent, one of the biggest franchises down here, Miracle Leaf, that has a whole network of doctors, and then represent a lot of just doctors individually. And they started reaching out to get involved on some of the clinical research. And then they also wanted to start doing ketamine infusions. So I kind of jumped into it, learned all about it. We helped launch several ketamine clinics, helped start several businesses outside of the country. But ultimately, I realized that we needed some significant legal reform here within our own country in order to really recognize the true therapeutic value of these compounds. And so started Mr. Psychedelic Law. I co-founded it with Dr. Michelle Weiner, who was one of my clients at the time, very close friend. We've worked on a lot of projects, including research with the University of Miami, launching her own ketamine clinic. And so we really came together and decided to build a medical and spiritual advisory board that could help guide us through proper legal reform. And so with our team, we've put on educational panels. We actually just recently filed a bill here in Florida to legalize psychedelics, and it's gotten tremendous support. Obviously, Florida is a red state. We're not as open as Oregon might be, and I don't expect for this bill to necessarily pass, but it's gotten the conversation started. And we've been just engaging with a lot of people really across the country and even outside the country on what the proper legal framework would look like. So I'm just excited to just be a part of that conversation and to work with all these smart people to try to come up with a rational, safe, and responsible way to roll out this new industry.
Yeah, most definitely. And I mean, you mentioned safety and responsibility, and that kind of leads me into my next question here. And that is, having been a part of the cannabis space for so long and really just knowing it inside and out from a legal and regulatory perspective, I'm curious to see what your thoughts are on this developing psychedelic space and what similarities maybe you see with this industry. I know a lot of people like to refer to psychedelics as cannabis 2.0. My own perspective is that it's going in a different direction. There is more of an emphasis on safety. There's more an emphasis on responsibility. But again, that's my own perspective. So I'm curious to see what your perspective has been and where you see this industry sort of coming together and going here over the next few years.
Yeah, well, one thing I realized with my nonprofit is that the advocacy work was important, but in order for the industry to truly progress, we need a significant deployment of capital within the industry. So I actually launched my own psychedelic investment firm. It's called Iter Investments, and our focus is really on deploying capital into early stage companies. And I have to spend a lot of time with investors actually explaining to them why this is so different than cannabis. So obviously they're similar in the sense that both cannabis and most psychedelic compounds other than ketamine are listed as Schedule 1 substances, right? So when you talk about some of the state and local stuff going on, it resembles cannabis in a lot of ways, as far as, you have something that's federally illegal, but you have states and municipalities that are looking to either decriminalize or create regulatory frameworks. But simultaneous with that, what we have going on at a federal level is extremely unique and different from what was going on in cannabis. Right now, what we're seeing is that the FDA is showing extreme acceptance of these psychedelic compounds, so much so that the FDA has designated both MDMA and psilocybin as breakthrough therapies, which means that they may be showing, based on the science, more efficacy than any other pharmaceutical products that are currently being offered as pharmaceutical products, and with a better safety profile. So this is not I kind of draw the distinction, and the way I kind of explain it to people is I tell them that cannabis was mainly driven, I believe, by adult use and recreational use. Yes, we started with medical, but the ultimate goal was we all have the right to access the plant, and we all should be able to, use it, whether it be recreational, therapeutically, medically, however we please. Really, the psychedelic framework, the way it's rolling out, is more science-backed and based on the biopharma play. So it's going through FDA drug approval, different compounds being approved for different indications, and going through that FDA drug approval process, and then rolling those drugs out through what the FDA calls REMS, is a risk evaluation mitigation strategy, which means that these psychedelic compounds will need to be administered at facilities. So we're not in a world where Zoloft or any of these other SSRIs are being prescribed. You go to the pharmacy, you take them for 2 months, and you come back and see your doctor. In this instance, you don't go to a pharmacy. You get the prescription and you get it administered within that office, and you actually cannot take it home. So when you look at the REM for Spravato, you have to actually state, which is S-ketamine. It's a nasal spray it's kind of like ketamine, but a nasal spray. You have to actually take it at the facility and stay within that facility for a couple hours after you take it. So it's a complete paradigm shift in the way mental health has been delivered in the past, and it's a completely new infrastructure that will need to be built to properly deliver these medicines.
Yeah, absolutely. And to pivot just a little bit here, to go back, you mentioned the venture capital firm and fund that you have recently launched. Very exciting. And so I'm assuming, you see the potential, you sort of understand how this space is beginning to materialize right now. And I think, a lot of these funds and these firms are playing a very pivotal role in helping to get a lot of these companies that are going to be key players in this industry off and running. Do you want to share just a little bit about, sort of the impetus behind forming this fund and what you hope to accomplish and achieve here with it over the next couple of years?
Yeah, absolutely. And due to securities laws, I can only say so much about the fund. But yeah, I'll tell you just from a general perspective, I'm very passionate about the industry and the therapeutic value that these compounds could have for various indications. And billions of dollars will need to be spent, not millions, billions of dollars will need to be deployed within this industry to really help it reach its full potential. And so, we plan to play a role where we are able to basically provide some of that seed or Series A round financing to some of these companies to really get off the ground. We're not really looking so much at the state and local companies. Some of the stuff that's going on at state and local perspective, I'm very actively involved from an advocacy perspective. But from an investment perspective, where we're seeing more of the opportunity is really on the biotech side, kind of what I described before. So, our role is really to offer support. We've built an absolutely stellar team to not only do the diligence on these companies, but also to support our portfolio companies and help them ensure success in the future. Because that's really our goal, is to really get capital in and make sure we could kind of guide them through the process and make sure they have the right strategy. So, we have doctors on our team, psychiatrists, patent attorneys, FDA attorneys. Really, it takes an army of people to fully develop a strong investment thesis and understanding for the direction that this industry is going. So that's kind of the role that we see ourselves playing, and we're very, very excited to kind of be that investment vehicle, the investment firm that the psychedelic industry could rely on to get capital properly deployed.
Yeah, most definitely. And circling back to Mr. Psychedelic Law, I know there's a lot of people out there. I've come across a lot of them, a lot of different companies that are really looking for legal guidance in a space right now that is still just really coming together. So there's still very little known about what's right, what's not right. Do you want to maybe share a little bit about some of the clients and individuals that you guys have been working with there, and maybe what's your suggestion or advice to some people out there and companies out there that are looking for reputable advice from a legal perspective as they move forward here in the industry?
Absolutely. So yeah, just to clarify, so my law firm is called Mr. Cannabis Law. So that's where I service all my cannabis and psychedelic clients. Mr. Psychedelic Law is where we really just push the advocacy side of it. We help with bills. We've worked with various cities and states on resolutions for decriminalization. I've been in very close contact with various groups such as Decrim Nature. They've been very, very helpful in helping me kind of form my own opinion and direction and vision for the industry, as well as other groups like Silo Health. There's just so many just tremendous groups doing unbelievable things within the industry. And so yeah, we've just been focused on basically advocacy and education. But as far as the type of clients that I'm seeing a lot of confusion out there. And one thing I always try to clarify is that the difference between decriminalization and legalization. So we're seeing a lot of cities that are decriminalizing. Now, all that means is that it's the lowest priority for that city, and they're not going to allocate resources to enforce that law. It's still criminal. So it's a little bit of a misnomer that they call it decriminalization. It's still criminal from a city perspective, a state perspective, and from a federal perspective. So really, it's just decriminalizing possession and use. So when you're in a city like Denver that has a decriminalized framework, it doesn't mean you're not allowed to commercialize any of these products. You can't go out and grow mushrooms and sell them to someone else. It's just decriminalizing possession and use, not the actual commercialization or sale of those products. Legalization is what we have out in Oregon under Measure 109, where it's a regulated framework where you can legally, from a state perspective, actually buy and sell mushrooms as long as you're licensed under their regulatory framework, which they now have a 2-year rulemaking period to roll that out. So I get a lot of calls from people saying like, oh yeah, I'm allowed to buy mushrooms in Oregon now. It's like, no, not yet. You're not allowed to. But even under the state legalized framework, it's also important for people to understand it's still federally illegal. So, for people, I look at so many different decks and businesses looking to start up, and there's just a tremendous amount of misunderstanding about what decriminalization means, and then also what state legalization means. And then you got to also deal with going through the FDA pathway, which is a whole different beast in and of itself and understanding. So I really get calls from a variety of different companies, and oftentimes they're misunderstanding the legal framework within their respective city or state. And I got to kind of backpedal and explain that to them. But really, the true legal pathway right now that we're seeing is going through the FDA pathway, which is through some sort of drug development or licensing technology to drug development companies, or opening up clinics that are offering. Right now, ketamine is the only legal psychedelic. It's a Schedule 3. Doctors are using it for its off-label use. So there are plenty of opportunities. I know a lot of people think like, oh, it's too early, I can't get involved. No, if you have the right business plan and you understand you're reaching out to the right people, there are tremendous opportunities right now. They're just a little bit different than what some people are expecting. Because once again, it goes back to cannabis. Everyone's thinking cannabis. I get calls from people, I want to open up a retail store. I want to start a brand. And I explain to them, even under Measure 109, which is our only state legal framework right now, there's no retail stores. You have a licensed service center. You go in and you have your psilocybin product administered at that licensed service center. There's no retail store where you go and pick up the psilocybin, take it home and consume it, which in cannabis world, it's the opposite. In cannabis world here in Florida, for example, you're actually required to pick up your cannabis and consume it in private. You can't consume it in public or at a facility. So the psychedelic space is just very different. A lot of misunderstanding out there, and my role is hopefully to kind of bring some clarity and direction to people when they're trying to roll out their businesses.
It's a very important role, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate. I mean, that's just fantastic knowledge that you just shared, and I know it's going to be helpful and beneficial to a lot of people out there. So thank you so much. Before I let you go, Dustin, one last question. I like to pose this question to a lot of people that I connect with, people that I feel are leaders and allies in this space. What motivates you the most? What inspires and motivates you the most about being involved here in the psychedelic space and helping to shape the framework that is eventually going to support what I think is going to be one of the most important spaces here for humanity and society when we talk about the healing potential of psychedelics. So I'm curious to know what motivates and inspires you the most about being involved in all of this.
Well, I think for anyone that wants to get involved in the psychedelic space, I think I kind of like to break things down into three. And there's three things I think you got to keep in your mind. Number one is what everyone already kind of knows, and that's that we're in a mental health crisis, right? There's not much debate. We're in a mental health crisis before the pandemic. Now the mental health crisis is even worse. Number two, and this is what I really didn't understand that much until I really dove into the space and started to talk to so many mental health practitioners, psychiatrists, nurses, therapists, is that the current pharmaceuticals that are being offered for these mental health issues are not working. And it's amazing because that's unanimous within the mental health industry. It's not like they're debating, oh yeah, we think this works, we don't think this works. Like 10 out of 10 psychiatrists are going to tell you that the current products that we are offering people for mental health do not work. They're pretty much as good as a placebo. The third thing to understand is that there's this class of products called psychedelics that are demonstrating extreme efficacy for solving some of these mental health issues. So you have a huge problem, current solution isn't working, and wow, we actually have science-backed research that's demonstrating that there is a solution here, and that's these psychedelic compounds. So what motivates me is really being able to be a part of this transformative revolution that's occurring right now that I believe could potentially heal the planet and have widespread impact on the mental health around the world. And I also think one thing people don't talk about is I think that psychedelics are going to bring so much information and so much more understanding about the way our brain functions. And right now, through all the doctors I work with and I speak with, I understand how little we know about the brain. And that's why it's so hard to go through some of these FDA trials and prove out efficacy for mental health conditions because we know so little about the brain. But I think with all the money that we're now deploying into the industry and with all the research we're now doing on psychedelics' effect on the brain, I actually think that society and the medical community is going to learn a lot more about how the brain functions, and we're going to have discoveries that go far beyond just psychedelic treatments.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Dustin, this has been an amazing conversation. I got to say, I've genuinely enjoyed it. There's so much information and knowledge here. I mean, we could sit here and we could chat for hours. There's so much to unpack here, but I appreciate it. I'd love to have you back here on the show again to maybe touch on some other topics, maybe also touch on some when you have an opportunity to talk a little more about the fund and the work that you're doing there. But this has been terrific. I want to thank you so much again for taking the time to be here.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm happy to come back anytime you want to have me.
Great. Thank you so much.
Have a good one.